Hi everyone, this is Michael from Addicts. I'm one of the instructor trainers and wanted to do a little tutorial of underwater photogrammetry. Obviously this is can be a very difficult thing to do, and so I'm not going to be able to cover every aspect in this first tutorial, but we're going to learn about using Agisoft Metashape and creating your first model from taking pictures to uploading and sharing with everyone. So a little bit about photogrammetry. It's been around for quite a long time, but has made some leaps and bounds improvements with modern technology and modern computer software. So you've probably all seen three-dimensional models created by different divers or archaeologists to show you the wrecks they've had. Maybe you've worn virtual reality goggles and actually swam through. You've maybe seen videos, 3D printed versions of different wreck sites or underwater features. This is one awesome website, this story maps made by the National Park Service Submerged Resource Center, and they show some of the history of photogrammetry work in the Great Lakes. So these lakes are very cold, some of the wrecks are very deep, and it really outlines some of the advantages photogrammetry gives for archaeologists, where they can scan an entire wreck in a single dive, not spend hours or days sketching the models. They can get much more accurate representations by being able to scan it quicker. They're able to visit the site more often and look at the differences between models year to year or season to season and see changes. They're also able to take precise measurements and analyze that above water and notice things they may have missed by being underwater. So some of the history you can check out there is cool. They now use this rig with three 45 megapixel cameras on it and are able to create these incredible models that you can view from your own computer. You can click on and learn more about different parts of the ship. You can see how these were taken using their new C array, which, like I said, uses three Nikon cameras, all shooting simultaneously, 45 megapixel cameras. So it's quite high detail that they are getting out of these models, and they're able to recreate these in a way that everybody can experience them. So whether you're an archaeologist wanting to take measurements, whether you're wanting just something fun to do on your new sites, whether you have a high-end camera or simply a GoPro, want to help you be able to create models underwater. And so we're going to talk a little bit about using, here's another one they have, talking a little bit about using Agisoft Metashape, used to be called Photoscan if you downloaded it previously. And we'll be walking you through the steps to film and create your first model. Okay, the version of Metashape I'm going to be using right now is what I just downloaded on this computer. It's version 1.6.2. A little bit about the computer I'm using. I'm using a Mac. It's a iMac, only an 8 GB memory. It's got no changes to it, no modifications, just stock. So it's a few years old now, and these are what I'm going to be using. So I'm going to back up in just a second and show you how to start from the beginning, but first I just wanted to explain a little bit about the steps we're going to be going through. First thing we're going to do is load some pictures in and go through the alignment stage. And this is where Metashape searches for feature points on the images and matches them across images to type points. So if I make my photo pane a little larger, I can show you what I'm talking about. If I clicked on one of these images, you can actually click and see the image. But if I right click, or if those Mac users, you can do control click, then I'm able to view matches and show you what the alignment does. So this is looking at that picture, that image that I selected, and comparing it to the one next to it. And you can actually see these lines and see these different points that it found that were the same between those two images. And it looks for those key points to do those feature points to create tie points between those images. And so it's looking at that between all of the images I loaded. After we do that, get rid of that. What it's going to do then is create a visualization form, a sparse cloud. And if I go back to my model, it's going to create this sparse cloud. And you can see by these blue squares are actually images. I can show thumbnails, and that shows each of what those images are. And I can move it around, and it placed where I took those different pictures from. And then it's going to create this point cloud. You can kind of see, it's a little bit difficult to see, but it's little points that are all parts of that image. And then after it makes that different point cloud, the next step is to generate the surface in a 3D mesh. And this is where I'll do the wireframe. So you can see this is kind of a 3D mesh. And if you zoom in, see tons of little triangles. And it creates those from those different meshes. And then we can actually even texture that model, which is where we kind of fill in those triangles with data from the images, and you can create a model that you can spin around like this, and we're gonna go through the steps to do that. So first, taking a little bit about taking pictures. If you read in the manual, it talks about some different cameras, different lenses, some of the benefits between still images and video images. These images were taken on a GoPro, so you can actually look at that information. You do show info, and because it has stored data in the image, when you take pictures with most modern cameras, you get what's called EXIF data, EXIF data, and that'll store the type of camera, the model, the focal length, the aperture, the ISO, the shutter speed, basically the equivalent of the 35mm focal length. Manual camera settings, then you'll want to take note of avoiding anything that will add noise to the picture. That's just going to interfere with those tie points. So camera settings that can add noise, super high ISOs, weird JPEG compression. You want to take them at the highest resolution possible. Keep your ISO lowers. You also don't want to have your shutter speeds too slow, otherwise you can blur during movements. With photogrammetry, you're always moving around the object and taking pictures as you move. So if your shutter speeds are low, then they can come out blurry. And this can even happen if you're using intervalometer, where the camera's just periodically taking pictures. If you use too slow of a shutter speed and you're swimming around the object, letting it take pictures, you can have blurring as you're moving while taking those pictures. So camera settings, just as a general rule of thumb, avoid camera settings that add noise or will make the image not crisp, sharp, and in focus. So in order to do that, you probably need sufficient light, so you can have a small enough aperture, you can have your ISO settings low enough, and you can have your shutter speeds fast enough. I think in the manual it says how much easier it is to do with natural light, but since we're focusing underwater, obviously, as you get deeper, as you go in places without great visibility, relying on natural light and actually having camera settings that are beneficial in photogrammetry can be difficult. So use high-end video lights with wide beams. Make sure the lights are a little bit behind your lens so you're not getting hot spots on the sides of your images. If you're using strobes, make sure you're using diffusers, wide arms on your arms out to your flashes or your strobes. Anything that can make it softer light so you don't have harsh conditions and can make it even from one image to the next. All right, let's spend just a minute talking about equipment. Without going into a full underwater photography lesson, we're going to talk about some of the specifics of things you might be using underwater, whether it's more of an action camera, whether it's a high-end digital camera, whether it's a DSLR, whether you're using strobes or video lights. What do we need and what's the best for photogrammetry specifically? So first, a little bit about cameras, lenses, and focal lengths. Agisoft recommends a 50 millimeter focal length lens. The focal length is defined as the distance from the sensor, which is up there on the Sony camera, to the opening of the lens. Now, so that would be 50 millimeter distance in that, which is basically impossible to achieve on an action camera such as a GoPro. You can see that's barely 50 millimeters, the whole thing. Definitely impossible on smaller cameras like phones. That's not near 50 millimeters width. And that 50 millimeters is purely a recommendation. They also say you can use 20 to 80 recommended. Underwater, even 20 is quite a long focal length. Most people are going to be using something more like 16, 15. This is both popular lenses for underwater photography. And the reason is the longer the focal length, then the narrower the view. So if you want to be able to capture images with a 50 millimeter lens, you're going to be quite far from your subject. Whereas something like this 16 millimeter or 50 millimeter, you're going to be able to get a lot closer to your subject, which is great underwater. Above water, you can get far away. You don't typically have particulate in the air. You have good visibility. You've got sun. Underwater, we don't always have the visibility to get as far away. So we need a wider angle lens like this to be able to get closer and use our lights, artificial lights, to light it up. Now, lighting is going to be important. You're going to want something more like a video light like that. Don't want spots in it. Consistency is important for photogrammetry. So if you have spot lighting up one area on one image and then you move and it's lighting up a different area, it's going to have a harder time aligning those and it's going to throw off your overall image. So we're going to use wider lenses than what Agisoft recommends. We're going to use artificial lighting, which is also not great. But if you're going to use video lights, use something with a wide angle. If you're going to use strobes, use a diffuser. Make sure that if this is your camera, that your strobes are wide apart and they're not in front. You don't want to get hot spots on the side of your images. So make sure that they're wide, use long arms, and that they're a little bit behind, and that you're using something to diffuse it. Same goes for video lights. And another benefit, if you're using like a DSLR or a higher end mirrorless, if you can afford to go with a full frame sensor, that'll be beneficial, as you will not need as wide of a lens to get the same view. If you're using a cropped sensor, then you need a wider lens than you would have to use on a full frame sensor. Cropped, depending on the ratio of the crop, like a CMOS 1.6, to get the same view as this 16 millimeter lens on this full frame, you would need a 10 millimeter lens. And then it becomes very difficult to keep those rectilinear, and it's just meaning that the software is having to do more by taking out the curvature of the fisheye. So I would recommend a more rectilinear lens over a fisheye lens, and that'll make it so that it's easier, especially if you are shooting with filming, taking video and then doing screen grabs or frame grabs. If I'm doing that on a zoom lens like this, I like to put tape on it so that my lens focal length is not changing accidentally in between shots. With frame grabs, there's no EXIF data, so something like this to keep the consistency is helpful. What I prefer rather than doing video, and one of the reasons I love this new camera, is it has an intervalometer, which means I'm not having to press the shutter button every time I take the picture. I can set that to just take it every specified time. You can do similar things on some of the action cameras out there, or you can shoot it in video and then take frame grabs. If you do, try to shoot 4K, as that'll give you a higher megapixel frame grab. Turn back on the camera angles on this one, you can see it's all different angles, and this is a really low image count to process this model. I'll use more for the demonstration. Try to place the object to where it's filling up as much of the frame as possible. If parts are missing, that's not an issue because you will be capturing them on other images. Metashape is only able to reconstruct geometry that is visible from at least 2 cameras. So make sure you're moving slowly, taking lots of pictures. If I would rather you take too many pictures, and then you can have the software actually reduce overlap. So you could come in and reduce the overlap, even set a maximum number of images. So when you're shooting, better to take too many and then sift through those and pick only the good ones or the ones with the correct amount of overlap later. Remember, more is better than not enough whenever you're shooting. And when you're shooting, you have the option of shooting photographs or still or video. So Metashape itself only can do still images, but what it does have is when you import, you have an option of importing video. And if you selected some video, let's see, I'll select this one of some models I made on a desk. You can select where it'll start from and the frame step. This is, you can do custom, small, medium, or large. And this is basically how many frames it's going to go in between grabbing a frame grab. So if, you, for example, you shot on 30 frames per second and you wanted to have one image every second, you would set this frame step at 30. And then every 30th frame, it's going to grab. And then if that wasn't enough images, you could come back and take it down to 20, 15, 10, 1, whatever you needed. And so you're probably thinking, hey, why don't I just shoot video? Some downsides to video, a few downsides. One, this is not actually using the video. This is Metashape will be creating basically screen grabs or frame grabs from your video. And those frame grabs will not have the EXIF data. So they will not know what the focal length was, what lens you were shooting, what camera, all that model. All of that information I pulled up from the photo will not be in there if you're using video. The nice thing about video is you can just turn it on, swim all the way around. It's easy to get angles. It's always going. But another downside of video is it tends to have slower shutter speeds. You know, your shutter speed could be 1/60th of a second, and if you're moving too fast and you're then you could be getting blurry images. But I don't want to scare you from shooting video. There are other calibration things you can do. You can manually calibrate it. It's a procedure I'm probably going to skip during ours because I have EXIF data on my images, and so Metashape will calculate that calibration parameters automatically during the align photo phase. But if the results for you are unstable, if you used video and need to, you can calibrate that, and we can go over that in another video. So shooting video is an option, but also if you're going to shoot video, same thing applies. Avoid settings that are going to add noise. If you can shoot it in 4K, even older GoPros like the Hero 5 that I'm using can shoot 4K. That'll give you just more megapixels in the frame grabs. You typically don't get as quite the quality out of frame grabs as you do shooting still images with the same camera. It's important to understand correct exposure techniques when shooting pictures for use in photogrammetry. If you pull up any camera manual, you'll be able to learn more about aperture, shutter speed, ISO, which are going to be the 3 key elements in a properly exposed picture. For photogrammetry, more than different balances of other artistic techniques of photography, you're most concerned about having sharp images. So you need to understand these tools so that you can use them correctly when shooting. First one we're going to discuss real quick is aperture. I've got a Sony manual pulled up just so I can use some of their graphics, but you'd find similar graphics in Nikon, Canon, any camera manual. So aperture is going to be basically the pupil opening of the lens, how big the opening is. The larger the opening, the more light it'll let in. So you'll have numbers on your lenses. Sometimes it's how they advertise what lens it is when you're purchasing it. They normally advertise the largest opening, or which will be a low number. Those F numbers or F stops are fractions, and the way those work is you take the the size of the lens and you divide it by the f-stop, and that's going to give you the diameter of that opening. So that makes it so the smaller the f-stop number is, the larger the number is. Now, so something like an f2, f1.4, really large apertures, those are going to let a lot of light in. The downside of letting a lot of light in is that you get a shallow depth of field. So this image down here shows on the left-hand side a shallow depth of field using a large opening aperture, something like a 1.4, a 2, 2.8. And then on the other side, more like an f22, maybe even up to f32, where everything's in focus. So for photogrammetry purposes, a smaller aperture would be preferred to have everything in focus, crisp images. This will make the alignment process easier. The downside is we're shooting underwater where there's less light, less ambient light. So we need to do things that will allow us to let more light in. And if we were to do that with shutter speed, you can accomplish the same amount of light in by going to a small aperture, then going to a slow shutter speed. But if you put your shutter speed really slow, below 1/60th, 1/30th of a second, you're going to be very difficult to not have blurry images from the movement of you holding the camera, pushing the shutter button. So the other thing we can change then, the third is ISO. ISO is going to be change the sensitivity of the sensor. This name comes back from film cameras when it was the speed of the film, how quickly the film absorbed that light to put the image onto the film. So a higher ISO will need less light to expose that image, which is great underwater, great on more modern cameras because you can bump the ISO up. The downside is, especially on older digital cameras, is if you put the ISO too high, you can introduce noise, which is another thing that'll interfere with the alignment process. So we don't want to put the ISO too high. So the other option we have in photogrammetry is to use artificial light, video lights or strobes. Okay, just a quick tour around Agisoft Metashape. So you're might have more of a white background or a black background. That's in settings. You can change that. But the buttons will all be in the same place. So basically I have new project button, new folder, save button. You'll want to be using that quite often. Go back or undo. This is going to be your navigation tool where you have this globe. You can move it around. You can look underneath. If you're using a trackpad, you can zoom in and out like that, or you can also zoom in and out with these buttons right here. You got your selection tool, which we'll go over later, your region, which is this box that's going to be the parts that of the model that the computer is processing. You've got the delete tool, crop tool, zoom. This is going to be handy. It'll center your image. This is going to show your sparse cloud, your dense cloud here, your model. You've got different options in the model. We've got the shaded, solid. Let me get rid of those pictures. Wireframe, the confidence, textured model, which is basically with the pictures in there. This is going to show you your images, and you can also look at thumbnails. Over here is going to be the chunks, basically the parts we're working on. Down here, you can make any of these windows bigger too. You've got either your photos, console, the different jobs you've run, and all of these, like I said, not only can you change the size, but you can also change the location. So I can pull up photos, I can get rid of that or make it its own window. I could then take this photos pane and stick it right there. or stick it back into wherever you wanted. You can do that with any of these different panes on the screen, so that you can really customize it to make the workflow easiest for you. I'm just gonna leave it how it's set up standard for the tutorial, so that it looks the same as what you get. Also, you got your different menu options up here. Add photos. What we're going to do a lot of is either, sometimes you can do it from here. You can also click on the chunk. One button I'll be using a lot if you're on a Mac and following along is the control click. It's like a right click if you're on one of those other computers, those non-Macs. So I'm going to exit out of this, quit Metashape, and just open it up so that we can work on one together. So Metashape, you've downloaded it, installed it on your computer. It's always going to, every time you open it for the first time, it's going to pop up with this activation screen. And it's going to pop up on every startup. You got three options. You can purchase it, get a license code, put it in there, and then it'll stop doing it. You can start a 30-day trial, which is great. Then you can save stuff, you can upload all of this tutorial. You can follow along step by step using the 30-day trial. In fact, I'll do that to demonstrate. Or you can continue using it in demo mode. I recommend this if you're just checking it out and you're not sure whether you're going to be purchasing it, or you don't want to start that clock on your 30-day trial. That being said, there's two different versions of Metashape, the standard and professional, and you can get a 30-day trial on both of those. So we'll start it in the demo mode. I'm gonna make my screen full so it's easier to see. And if you decided, hey, I want to save as I'm going, I want to be able to upload this, then you can always go up into Activate Product. I'll do that right now. I'm going to start the 30-day trial, which will start my countdown timer. And then you'll get this thing saying you've activated it, and then you can upgrade that when you're ready, which I think you'll be hooked after this. Okay, one of the first things we're going to do is double check our preferences. I'm going to leave almost everything how it comes standard. This is in the tools menu if you're on one of those weird non-Mac computers. Otherwise, it is in the Metashape and then preferences. You can change things between if you want light, dark, or classic. On the theme, this is using the dark theme. That's what it came standard, so I'm going to leave that. You can write log files and select what folder you want those to go into. I'm not worried about that right now. GPU, this is a big one. If you have a discrete GPU device that's detected by the program, if you have some high-end graphics card, you want Metashape to be able to exploit that GPU processing power. That'll speed up the process significantly. If you do select that, then Agisoft does not recommend to use CPU and performing GPU accelerated processing. I don't understand, but for some reason that can make it slower. So if you have a graphics card, select that. It uses those on some functions. Other functions are quite CPU heavy, so you'll really want a computer with high-end graphics and high-end speed or RAM. And then you can change other settings in here. Keep depth maps is nice because it can speed up when you're redoing things. So since you're new and going to be experimenting and want to try it on medium or high, or want to try building your mesh from a dense cloud or directly from depth maps, it can be useful to keep depth maps. The downside is it takes up space on your computer. So if you are hard drive space limited, then I would uncheck keep depth maps. Otherwise, that can come in handy. And that's kind of it for the settings. Luckily, once you do that, we don't really have to change those again. So we can start the process. You've taken your pictures. For this, if you want to follow along and create your own model, you can do that. You can just use your cell phone, take pictures of something around the house. If you've got something underwater, if you want to jump in the swimming pool like I did for this tutorial, you can. when you are taking those images, there's only a certain image types that are allowed by Metashape. If for some reason your phone, like if you have an iPhone and you imported the pictures and they came into some weird format that wasn't JPEG, TIFF, DNG, PNG, or whatever, if you look in the manual, there's a list of accepted images. There's a program built into Macs that's pretty cool called Automator, and you could quickly, if you're gonna see, I'll do a workflow. I'm just going to show you. You can come over here to get specified Finder items, add that in, and then you come down to photos, and you can. This is basically running shortcuts, so you can change the image, which is going to be change type of images. Add that in. It's going to give you a warning that it'll do something unreversible. If you want, you can add in this thing where it copies them before you change them if you're not confident in what you're doing. But then basically you could open your folder of images. You could drag all of those in there and you just hit run and it'll change it to whatever type you want to do it. I shot mine on a GoPro, so they're already JPEGs and we don't need to worry about that. But it's just something to be aware of. It can be useful for bulk changing lots of images. So what we're going to do now is basically load images in, and we're going to be able to then start the process. So you can always come up here to workflow or this chunk one. This is kind of the folder where we're going to put things. If you can control click on that and just go to process, or add, and then the rest of the options will be in process. So we'll do add photos. Gonna select all of these. I think it's a little over 100 images. We'll see how many align. I did shoot them underwater, but I was just free diving, so they're probably not great all around it. So if I click on this down arrow, you now see that I've got a folder of cameras, and if I click on that, you can see all the different images. If I were to come down to this photos pane, I can actually pull up the images, or you can go back to your model later on. But I could look at different images. If they were blurry, I could delete some. You can even come over here and have it tell you whether it's got good image quality, so you can do selected cameras, all of it. At this point you could mask images, which is something we're going to skip for this portion. But right now we're going to just keep working in that chunk one. We've added images, and then the first process we're going to do, I'm doing control click on that chunk to get there. We're going to come down to process, and the first and only option right now is align photos. This is where it's going to look for those differences in those contrast points and tie points. Now it'll pop up. You got a few different windows. This generic pre-selection, basically it goes through and quickly looks at them for things that are the same to start before it does the heavy processing of analyzing the tie points. You've got your accuracy, different levels. It wouldn't go any higher than high. Medium's probably fine for this too. I'll leave it on high. And then this estimated versus sequential, that's where it's going to estimate pictures before it looks for tie points. If you did shoot them off of like a diver propulsion vehicle and you were confident on the way order they were shot, you could go to sequential. But do remember, it will try to line up your last image with your first too. So if you did not complete a full circle or a full round, that could get weird. I'm just going to leave it on estimated right now. I'm going to leave kind of all the settings as default. In fact, this was down at, should have been down at 10,000, I believe, or 2,000. These key point limits, I wouldn't change anything from, I was trying to put it back to whatever the default settings were. Then you're going to hit OK. And once you do hit OK, you won't be able to do anything else in that program, and your computer might run slowly until everything else is done. If you had done this with a video, you would need to import. So I'm just going to close that for a second. If you're doing a video, you're going to go to import video. If you have a PC, you need to download some other software because your computer's not as good as a Mac. And then you would select your video and do that frame step number. And basically, that's not going to do anything in this. It's going to go through and create. So I think this video, you can see I just scroll around it. So it would just create different images. And then basically, you're going to set a destination folder for those. And then you would go select add photos, and everything else will be the same. So if you get to this point, everything's the same. We're going to go to process align photos, leave those on, and we're going to click OK. It'll then start doing what you'll probably spend most of your time looking at. It'll give a time that it's going and a time left. This time will never be accurate. It's either incredibly slow or incredibly fast. So right now it's obviously going down faster than 1 second, or it'll be super slow. So I'll pause the video and not make you have to watch the processing happen in real time. Okay, now that my photos have finished aligning, you can see over here, if you haven't expanded that chunk down, it looks like I had 156 pictures, 119 of those aligned. In your photos pane, you can see a little bit more image about that. If it's got a check mark next to it, aligned, and then some of these didn't align for whatever reason. And I can actually then click out of that photo, move this down, and you can go to my, I'll zoom out a little bit. You can see all those pictures, and right now it's got the thumbnails on it. So it looks like I did a good circle around the top, not as much info down here. That's okay though. I think it'll still turn out. So once again, I can turn off those images or not, or the thumbnails if not. So one thing I'm going to look here is my region is not quite lined up with that. So we'll fix that in just a second. But before that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about image alignment now that we've done that. So you can see not all of mine aligned. Partly I probably just didn't have enough pictures on the other rows for those to align. So I'm sure if I took more, probably all of them would align. Maybe some of them weren't good enough. So there's a few things you can do to help with image alignment. In certain capturing scenarios, you might need to mask the photos. So that's something you can do in the photos before alignment, and then in the alignment phase, go over those settings one more time so you can see. I'm not going to do it, but you can, in the advanced setting, apply those masks and use whether you want it to ignore different things for the alignment phase. That might be nice underwater if you captured the diver in an image and then they weren't in another image. You don't want to throw off the alignment because of that. You have the different accuracy settings, right? High, medium, low. High is going to basically look at the entire image. Highest will actually upscale the image, and medium will basically take it down by a factor of 4, 2 times by each side. Low, sources of the files are scaled by a factor of 16, which means they're not looking at as much of the image for those different type points. So the processing speed is faster, but the accuracy is off. Or these, key points first is the number of, it's the upper limit on the feature points that it's looking for every image. You could set that to 0 if you want it to be unlimited, but then you could have an unnecessary amount of bad tie points. So it's best to I just leave them where they're set right now. The tie point limit is number indicates upper limit of matching points on every image. You could leave that one at 0. That doesn't using 0 doesn't really apply to tie point images. So leave that as whatever they were set on for you. And another thing you can do is estimate the image quality down here before you even align them. So once again, control click, estimate image quality. You can do it on all cameras. You can have it ignore masked regions if you've done that masking. I'll just do it on selected so that it's quicker on that one. And then anything with a level that's of 0.5 or below, it recommends that you probably don't use that because it can throw off things. So after we've aligned images, I'm going to also have it, I'm going to check the region. So anytime you're checking the region, you want to do this three-dimensionally. So I'm going to make sure that my region is, which I'm going to select over here to Resize Region. Make sure it's tall enough that it's capturing all of my rec. I can bring it up a little bit. And then the other thing I want to do is rotate the region because it looks like it's not quite lined up with the thing I wanted to capture in it. So I'm going to rotate, just twist that around like that, and then I think that'll be capturing enough. Anytime you move the region though, you want to look at it three-dimensionally. So see, as I rotated it, I kind of twisted it up there, but it still looks like it's capturing everything I want to without catching too much extra stuff. So now we can go on to the next phase. So next thing we're going to do is, this is a point cloud, or the sparse point cloud. So if we just control click on that and go to process, next thing we do is optimize cameras. I don't actually understand what all this is doing, but doesn't take very long, so we'll optimize those real quick. And then we will go on to building our dense cloud. So you've got some different settings here. Same thing, start on medium or low. This reuse depth maps would be if you've already done this before. This depth filtering, I think it comes default at mild, in which case we'll just leave it on there. But basically what you have is, due to some factors like noisy, badly focused images, there can be some outliers among those points. So you can set those outliers in Metashape to filter those out. And so you basically have from disabled, mild, moderate to aggressive. If the areas to be reconstructed contains meaningful small details, then it's reasonable to choose aggressive. If moderate would be, obviously in between mild and aggressive. But the best thing is going to be to do is experiment, and it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all depending on how much backscatter you have in the water and things like that. So we'll leave it at mild for now, and we're going to hit OK, and then the computer is going to do its thing with the time. That's not going to be accurate at all. And creating depth maps is one of the most processing heavy things your computer does. It can be skipped. We can go straight to building a mesh, which is the next step. But for this tutorial, we're going to do it from a dense cloud. Okay, when your processing finishes, you will have a dense cloud. Although it won't show it, it'll stay on this sparse cloud. You come up here and go from the 4 points to the 9 points. That'll show you your dense cloud, which is, just as the name sounds, a denser version of points. You can spin that around, see it. At this point, you're going to want to check your region or your bounding box. Looks like it's covering everything I wanted to get the logo in it. I might make it a little bit smaller. So we'll just come up here to Resize Region, and you can drag these. Remember, you are adjusting in 3 dimensions, so make sure anytime you move something here that you check it by spinning it around. Make sure you're still capturing everything that you want to in your bounding box, because nothing outside of that will be processed. So like right there, I cut off part of the logo, so I'm going to resize that again. Make sure I'm getting that in. Okay, and then we're going to move on to building the mesh. So once again, control click on chunk, go down to process. It's the next step, build mesh. You'll have some options. First is the source data. There's two options that we would consider, dense cloud or depth maps. dense cloud would be what we just made, so we'll use that. Sparse cloud, no reason to do that, and you're going to get a very basic model if you do it from sparse cloud, as it's not as much information. It would be a lot less processing power, so that might be nice. If your computer's really old, really slow, you could do that just to see how it's going to look, but we're normally going to choose from either dense cloud or depth maps. Depth maps is great if you've got a really fast GPU. You can kind of skip the dense cloud phase, but since we made a dense cloud, we're going to select that. The surface type, we'll leave it at arbitrary. For our purposes, we're looking at 3D only. And then face count. This is going to basically give you, the higher that is, just like most things, the higher you put it, it's going to take longer to do. But it's going to give you more surfaces, those triangles that I showed you from the mesh that you're building. Down here in the advanced, if we'd already created a mesh before, we could reuse those depth maps. That's one of the processes that it's going to do. For quality is probably going to be one of the main settings you're going to be changing back and forth on this. There's a high, medium, and low, or custom. And one of the reasons you might want to do custom is the number of faces on here is going to dictate how large the file of the model is. And if you're going to be ultimately uploading to Sketchfab, you need to limit that to, I think, about 50 megabytes or 1.5 million face count. But we can also lower that face count after. So I'm going to put it at high right now just to make the model look a little bit better. And if you're wondering what the different settings are, they have different ratios for how many of those polygons are on the mesh. So we're going to calculate vertex colors. Because our source data has some color information, the photos, and that'll make it so that our model has colors in there. And then, like I say, reuse depth maps is only an option if you've made one before. So we're going to go ahead and click OK and let that process happen. Okay, now the mesh is finished being decimated. So as soon as that's done, it's going to go through, put the colors into the mesh, and then we will be able to come up here and switch from our dense cloud to our model. And if you click the arrow next to it, you've got different options: the shaded model, the solid, the wireframe, which will show those polygons, or the shaded is going to be using some of those pictures. So that puts in some colors for it. You can see anything that was outside our region has been cut off. You can still look at pictures, the thumbnails, and then what we're going to do next is add texture. So same thing, control click, go down to process, build texture. We got some different options here. First, the texture type. So the default is going to be diffuse map. It's the basic texture that stores colors of the model surface. Other options, depending on what your sources were, could be normal map or occlusion map. Occlusion is going to have shading based on some of the source data. We're going to leave these on default diffuse map. The source data we're going to leave same thing on default. We're going to use the images. You could upload a 3D model for it to take that source data from. The mapping mode default is generic. Some of these don't apply to underwater stuff, and some of them aren't even shown here, such as single camera, keep UV, or spherical, which are for certain types of images only. We're going to leave that at generic, and same thing with blending mode. Down here in advanced is maybe someplace where you want to make some changes. This enable hole filling is basically where it'll guess and estimate and fill in holes so that your model doesn't have holes where it doesn't feel like it has enough data. So if you have hole filling, this is to avoid that kind of salt and pepper effect. If it's got a really complicated surface, it's nice that it'll fill in those. Ghost filtering includes some thin structures or moving objects which failed to be reconstructed in the polygonal model. So this can be used to fill in those ghosting effects. I would just leave those checked for now. And then one thing that you may decide that you want to change is the texture size count. So it specifies the size, both the width and the height of the texture at listen pixels, and it determines the number of files for the texture to be exported to. So for now, I would just leave it default, but that's something you can play around with, both numbers and to get higher or lower quality texture. If you think of this as kind of taking picture data and putting it onto all of those polygonal shapes of the model, you can do that with different number of pixels. That's what this is going to be here. So once again, we'll click OK and let that process start. Okay, now that we've added texture to our model, we can come up here to our model icon and go down and view the textured model. And you'll see that's going to look a lot more like a picture. This one's still, it's got not super crisp edges, which I'll show you why in just a little bit, but we can take our ball and move all around. Yes, you can go underneath it. Obviously, we didn't take pictures underneath, so it's just assuming the underneath looks exactly the same as the top. If we had taken pictures, you'd even be able to go inside, but you can see just by the over pictures, it's got part of that shark inside there. This model around, especially when I zoom in, you can see that it's not super crisp, especially on the bottom edges. You can barely even read the SS Discovery. That from the top view, the tile of the bottom of the pool looks really good, and that all makes sense when you look at my camera angles. So if I zoom out, you can see from the top I got a lot of great images. As I get closer on the bottom, areas like this, there's not detail because there's no image camera getting that angle great. Same with here. So the fact that you can even read that's actually impressive. If I had filled in this area with images and had the same kind of overlap that I do on the sides, the bow and the stern are really missing some data that is not found based on how I took my images. All right, so now most importantly, you want to be able to share your model with the world. So we're going to create an account on Sketchfab. They've got free accounts. So let's see, we'll do one for Dive Addicts. And you'll be able to create a free one. There are options for paid accounts with a few more privileges. They'll give you more uploads per month. You can upload larger files and just do a few more things like that. So sign up. You want to be able to upload ones, create your profile. I'll do this later. So I'm going to say I'm an individual, 3D printing or 3D scanning enthusiast. We'll start with the basic plan. And then we'll need to confirm it from our email. Now that I have confirmed my email, I'm going to come over here to Settings and go to Password and API. I'll blur this out so that none of you are uploading strange models to a Dive Addicts account. We're going to copy that. Next, going to come over to Metashape. We're going to File, Upload Data. We'll come down here and we'll paste in our API key. You can click remember that so you don't have to do it each time. If you had a pro version of Sketchfab, you could select private model. We'll select draft just until we had a chance to check it, and then we'll publish it later. We can give it a title, and all of this title and description we can edit in Sketchfab. But we'll go ahead and give it something so we can find it, even though it's our only model on there so far for the tutorial. And then what you'll probably forget to do at least once in your photogrammetry career is you'll do the sparse cloud and forget to change that to model. And if you upload the sparse cloud, it'll look just like a sparse cloud on Metashape, and it's probably not what you want to share with your social media community. So make sure you change this to model, and then you're just going to click OK. Easy enough. Our model is not over the face count. If your model is over that, I'll show you a quick way after this to limit how many faces it has so that it is under the file type size limits for the standard version of Sketchfab. Anyways, ours is only 17.5 megabytes. I'm pretty sure the limit is around 50, so we should be good. It's uploading. It'll take a few minutes to upload. The upload process is doing just that. Once that happens, it's going to go on to some other processes that are all happening on the Sketchfab side. So at that point, you could close Metashape. Your model is too large to upload to Sketchfab. You can either build the mesh, and when you build the mesh, you can set a limit on the face count, this custom area, and then you can type in whatever you want. Alternatively, you can go up to Tools and go to Mesh and Decimate Mesh. We'll just create one real quick. So right now we've got a face count of 751,000, which is actually plenty small enough to upload to Sketchfab. But just as an example, I'll show you one taking it down to 200,000. I find if you're at just over a million, you should still be fine. Somewhere between 1.2, 1.5 million is going to be your face count limit. That's going to equal the megabit size that is allowed to update to Sketchfab. And then you want to do replace default model, so you'll know, and it'll actually generate a second model. So then you can see here we've got one with 751,000 and then one with 200,000. You can see the quality goes down. But like I said, Sketchfab will actually allow even larger than this one. So and then if you wanted to remove that, you could remove that, but then you have two separate models, and whichever one is clicked or bolded, highlighted is the one you're working on. So if your model comes out 2 million and you don't have a pro account on Sketchfab, you'll want to decimate the mesh to make it smaller. When your model is completed the upload, it'll pop up with a link right here, or alternatively in your Sketchfab account, you'd be able to find it, but we'll just click there. It's going to load our 3D model, and then we're going to go over some settings and stuff in Sketchfab to do so that our model looks better than that when people click on it. So there's a couple edit settings. You got edit properties and edit 3D settings. We're going to go to edit 3D settings. First, you'll be able to move it around so you can see it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to align, we're going to go over lighting, annotations, VR, and some of the different settings you can do for that, and then save it. We'll also go over different background options. Field of view, you can do that if you change it from anything but 45. I think it makes it look strange, so it's up to you, but I like 45, and that's what it defaults at. So we'll get it back close to that, or you can alternatively type. So straighten model, for this it's easier if you show the advanced rotation. So basically this is our plane and we want to straighten it to that. So we're going to lower it down. And just like when you're adjusting the region, you need to move all around it to make sure that you're in the correct place. So we're kind of lined up with it sitting right on top. Probably lower it off that a little bit. And I think that's looking okay. We will go down and do these renderings, classic PBR. I've heard some people say they have better luck with classic. You can come back to those if you're having issues. So if you're having issues with people seeing it, maybe change that. Background, we can select the background you want. Before we do that, I'm just going to put it at a view like that. That makes it easier to see. And then, yeah, you can see you can do all different backgrounds. You can do images. I think something like that looks good, but find something in contrast, environment. You can change that. If we go over here to lighting, you can change the brightness on it. You can also change the room, make it look like you're somewhere outside, inside. But these ground shadows, basically you can make it look like there's sunlight shining on it. Most of the time we don't have big shadows underwater, so I like to do it without ground shadows. But you have those different options. You can come over here, just like you can change lighting settings on pictures, you can do that. You can come through these annotations. Can be kind of fun, so you can do double click and we can put an annotation shark. Okay. Put another annotation tank. So just to show you what's possible. You can label those, give them descriptions. So edit this one. This one, shark, I'll do toy shark. Okay, so now when you click on those, you see what they look like. Animation, if we're not going to do anything with animation right now. Virtual reality is great if you want anyone to be able to look at it with virtual reality. It gives you some tips so you can scale the individual to make the model look huge to them or small to them. And so we can make whether you want it to look like a big wreck or whether you want it to look realistic, since it was just a toy. They can have a floor so they can't go through it. You can change where the floor level is. Those of you that have used some VR goggles, there's a lot to do here. And then sound. And then one thing you want to do, I'll go back to how it was like this. We want to save the view. Alternatively, save settings will do the same thing. And then it'll look like that when you visit the model. So we'll go ahead and publish this. Go see my model and we can see what it looks like. Okay, now you can select an annotation. You can see what it looks like. People can spin it all around, play around with it. One other thing I suggest is that we go to Edit Properties. This is where you can change the title, description of it, put it in categories, add tags. And one of these things you want to do is make it free so that you'll get more upload credits if you make it free or put it in the store. And this is also another place where you can do 3D settings, you can re-upload it, and do other things you want. So we'll save that. Visit the model again. Lastly, I'm sure the reason you're doing this is so you can share it on social media. We've got share settings down here. I wouldn't use this link. That'll take them to your login and stuff. So you want to do the share, or if you're going to embed, So share like this. You can easily make a Facebook link, Twitter. It'll pull up a thing saying to check it out, just like your typical share links. So you can even click on Facebook and it'll pull that up, and then you can embed it right inside your website. On Sketchfab, you can search for people, look at certain models. You can follow people, have followers, and just have a lot of fun making underwater models.